You ever wake up at midnight to a flashlight in your face and some loudmouth yelling about official HOA business? Because that happened to me last Saturday, and let me tell you, it was about as dumb as it sounds. My name's Owen Anderson. I bought my house in this neighborhood about a year ago, and it's been a circus ever since. The HOA, here run by a woman named Cheryl Daniels to make everyone's lives miserable. Cheryl Daniels is the type of woman who carries a clipboard like it's a badge and treats minor infractions like federal crimes. If your grass is half an inch too high, expect a nasty letter taped to your door. Anyway, that night, I was dead asleep when I heard banging on my front door. I stumbled out of bed, threw on some jeans, and opened it, only to get blinded by 3 flashlights. Standing there were 3 people, all wearing cheap matching polos that said HOA Patrol in peeling iron-on letters. Cheryl was right in front, arms crossed, tapping her foot like I was late for a meeting I never agreed to. Behind her were 2 guys who looked like they got lost on their way to a paintball tournament. "Owen Anderson," Cheryl barked, "you are hereby evicted from the neighborhood effective immediately due to repeated violations." "At midnight," I said, rubbing my eyes. "Are you out of your mind? This is an emergency action."
"The board voted," she snapped.
I laughed. "You mean the board of you and your 2 drinking buddies?" "Refusal to comply will result in legal action," one of the polo clowns added, trying to sound tough. Now, I'm used to Cheryl's nonsense, but this was a whole new level of crazy. I leaned against the doorframe, completely unimpressed. "You can't evict me." "First of all, that's not how any of this works. Second, this isn't even an apartment. I own this house." Cheryl shoved a crumpled paper at me. "Official notice," she said proudly. It looked like it was typed in Comic Sans and printed at a gas station. Not a single legal stamp or real signature on it. "Yeah," I said, "this is adorable." "You have 5 minutes to vacate, or we will call the authorities," Cheryl threatened. I smiled wider. "Funny you mention that." I stepped back inside, grabbed my phone, and called my cousin Wyatt. Wyatt isn't just any guy, he's the actual county sheriff. Not a deputy. The sheriff. And he happens to live 10 minutes away. "Hey Wyatt," I said loud enough for everyone on my porch to hear. "You mind swinging by? Got some fake cops trying to illegally evict me." Cheryl's face twisted like she had just eaten a lemon. Her little backup dancers started shifting nervously. "You can't call the sheriff," Cheryl barked. "Lady," I said, "you showed up at my house at midnight with fake badges and a fake eviction notice. You're lucky I didn't call the real cops 10 minutes ago." Wyatt said he'd be there in 5 minutes. And knowing him, he'd be bringing friends. I turned back to Cheryl and her patrol. "Y'all might want to stick around," I said. "Wouldn't want you missing your big moment." I leaned casually against the doorframe, arms folded, watching Cheryl and her so-called patrol shuffle their feet. The night air was thick with an awkward tension they clearly hadn't anticipated. Porch lights from a few neighboring houses flicked on as curious residents peeked through blinds and cracked doors, drawn by the ruckus. Soon enough, 2 sets of headlights rolled slowly down the street, bathing the whole scene in a flood of white. A black and white cruiser pulled up to my curb, followed immediately by another. Wyatt stepped out of the first, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. Deputy Flores climbed out of the second cruiser, her hand resting lightly on her belt. Wyatt's boots hit the pavement with deliberate weight as he approached. Cheryl straightened up like a student caught passing notes, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. "Evenin'," Wyatt said, his voice low and steady. "Got a call about some unauthorized activity?" Cheryl piped up immediately, voice high and brittle. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. This man is violating community standards and refusing to vacate." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "At midnight." "It was an emergency action," she insisted, waving the crumpled paper like it was a golden ticket. Wyatt took it from her with 2 fingers, holding it up to the porch light. His eyes scanned it, his mouth twitching downward. "This," he said slowly, "is not a legal document. This is barely a grocery list." Cheryl opened her mouth to object, but Wyatt cut her off with a raised hand. He turned to Deputy Flores. "Get statements. Start with Mr. Anderson." Flores nodded and pulled out her notepad. Wyatt faced Cheryl squarely. "Now, explain something to me. On whose authority are you operating tonight?" Cheryl hesitated, just long enough to give herself away. "The HOA board authorized, right?" Wyatt interrupted. "And who exactly is on this board?" Cheryl faltered again. "Well, myself and a few community members." "These two?" Wyatt asked, jerking a thumb at the two polo-wearing jokers. One of them, a scrawny guy with a patchy beard, spoke up. "Yeah, we're board members." "And when was this board elected?" Wyatt asked, voice cool. Cheryl bristled. "We assumed control after the previous board resigned." Wyatt tilted his head. "You assume control? There's no record of any election, no minutes, no official filing with the county." Cheryl's lips pressed into a thin line. Wyatt turned to Flores. "Sounds like impersonation of a legal authority, possible harassment, and unlawful attempted eviction." "Let's get statements from the neighbors too. Seems like half the block's watching." At that, Cheryl finally lost her composure. "You can't do this. We're the HOA. We make the rules." Wyatt stepped closer, his badge catching the porch light. "You don't make the law, lady. And tonight, you broke quite a few." Deputy Flores was already moving door to door, knocking and asking for witnesses. Neighbors who normally kept to themselves were all too eager to talk. Apparently, Cheryl's midnight patrols weren't a one-time thing. Mrs. Carmichael, 3 houses down, told Flores about being woken up last week by the same crew threatening to fine her for leaving her recycling bin out an extra hour. Another neighbor, Mr. Patel, pulled up security footage on his phone showing Cheryl's group peeking through windows late at night. Wyatt's jaw tightened as he listened. After gathering enough statements, he turned back to Cheryl. "You're coming with us," he said. "You too," he added, gesturing to the 2 men. Cheryl shrieked. "This is an outrage. I demand my lawyer." "You'll get a phone call," Wyatt replied, unimpressed. "Right after we book you for criminal trespass, harassment, impersonating an official, and attempted unlawful eviction." Seeing the writing on the wall, the 2 board members tried to slip away quietly, but Deputy Flores caught them both by the wrists and cuffed them without ceremony. Wyatt called for a transport van, and soon enough, Cheryl and her minions were being loaded into the back, still protesting. Before Wyatt left, he walked back over to me, his boots thudding softly against the concrete. "You might want to think about organizing a real HOA election," he said. "One with actual oversight." "Believe me," I said, "that's going to be my top priority." He clapped me on the shoulder, then headed back to his cruiser. As I watched the taillights disappear down the street, a few neighbors wandered over. Mrs. Carmichael, Mr. Patel, and a couple of others I'd only waved to before. "About time someone stood up to them," Mrs. Carmichael said, shaking her head. "They've been running roughshod over us for months." "They fined me $500 for having a garden gnome," Mr. Patel added. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Well," I said, "seems like we might have some cleaning up to do." The small group nodded. We made plans right there on my porch for a neighborhood meeting the next evening. No more secret patrols, no more fake fines, and definitely no more midnight evictions. The next day, after a few strong cups of coffee and a lot of group texts, we held the meeting at the community park. Word had spread fast, and nearly every homeowner showed up. Even people who usually stayed out of neighborhood politics came, fueled by months of pent-up frustration. We set up folding chairs under the pavilion. A retired judge from down the street, Mr. Langston, volunteered to oversee the election process. He brought a professional air to the proceedings that made everyone feel confident things would be handled properly. We nominated candidates, opened the floor for speeches, and held a secret ballot vote right there on the spot. By sunset, we had a brand new board, full of level-headed people who actually cared about the community. I didn't run for a position myself, but I agreed to serve on a new oversight committee tasked with reviewing every single action the old board had taken. Mr. Langston made it clear, anything found to be illegitimate could be reversed or thrown out. Over the next few weeks, we dug through the old records, or what little there was. Cheryl and her crew had issued thousands of dollars in bogus fines, handed themselves reimbursements for patrol expenses, and even tried to transfer money from the HOA account to a private one under Cheryl's name. Mr. Langston worked with Wyatt to build a case. Turned out, Cheryl wasn't just facing misdemeanor charges anymore. The financial misconduct bumped things up to felony embezzlement. Her little midnight patrol had backfired bigger than she could have possibly imagined. Meanwhile, the vibe in the neighborhood changed. People started talking more, helping each other out, hosting block parties. The fences that had once felt like barriers started feeling more like shared boundaries between friends. As for Cheryl, she ended up pleading guilty to multiple charges to avoid a longer sentence. Last I heard, she was doing community service in another county, picking up trash on the side of the highway. Every time I mow my lawn now, I wave at my neighbors and they wave back. No more ridiculous fines, no more clipboard tyrants, no more midnight raids. And every time I see Wyatt at family cookouts, he just shakes his head and says, "Only you could turn a fake eviction into a full-blown neighborhood revolution." I'll take that as a compliment. A few days after the neighborhood meeting, I found myself back under the same park pavilion, this time surrounded by a small team of volunteers. Folding tables were stacked with messy piles of old HOA paperwork, a few battered file boxes, and a laptop that Mr. Langston's grandson had brought to help organize everything. We worked in shifts, combing through every scrap of documentation Cheryl and her fake board had left behind. It was tedious work, but the deeper we dug, the uglier it got. "Check this out," said Pam, the retired accountant who lived 2 streets over. She tapped a highlighted ledger with her pen. "Look at these payments. $2,000 for community morale events. But there's no record of any event. No receipt. Nothing." Mr. Langston adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. "They laundered it, transferred the funds to a shell account, and called it legitimate spending." I ran a hand through my hair. "How much are we talking about?" Pam flipped through a few more pages. "At least $25,000 over the past year." Mr. Langston grimaced. "That's not small claims court material. That's grand larceny." It hit me then just how serious this was. Cheryl hadn't just bullied people about lawn decorations and trash bins. She had systematically stolen from all of us. And with Wyatt already working with a county attorney, things were about to escalate. That afternoon, Wyatt stopped by the park during his rounds. He wore plain clothes this time, but the badge clipped to his belt was a silent reminder of who he was. "We finished the forensic accounting," Wyatt said, pulling up a chair across from me. "Between the fake fines, unauthorized reimbursements, and straight-up theft, it's closer to $40,000. I blinked. 40. 42, to be exact, Wyatt said. "And that's just what we can prove without subpoenas for their private accounts." Pam whistled low under her breath. Mr. Langston just nodded solemnly. Wyatt leaned in, lowering his voice. "District Attorney's Office is filing charges. Multiple felonies: embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. Cheryl's looking at serious prison time." "Good," I said. "She deserves every second." Wyatt wasn't done. "The state's attorney is also looking into civil asset forfeiture. If we can prove she used HOA funds for personal gain, they can seize her assets to reimburse the neighborhood." That got everyone's attention. Pam straightened up in her chair. "You mean we might actually get our money back?" "Some of it," Wyatt confirmed. Depends on what she still has left. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park, the weight of everything settled in. This wasn't just about petty harassment anymore. It was about justice. The next morning, I got a call from Wyatt. He asked if I could come to the courthouse. Cheryl's arraignment was scheduled, and because several residents were listed as victims, our presence would send a strong message. When I arrived, the courthouse steps were buzzing with reporters. Word had spread fast. Fake HOA president indicted for grand larceny made for juicy headlines. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. The new board members sat together in the gallery, a solid wall of quiet fury. Cheryl shuffled in wearing a wrinkled suit, her wrists cuffed in front of her. Her lawyer, a wiry man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, whispered frantically in her ear. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steel-gray hair, called the case. The charges were read aloud one after another, and Cheryl's face grew paler with each one. Her lawyer entered a not guilty plea, but the judge wasn't having any nonsense. Bail was set at an astronomical figure, $500,000, and Cheryl was remanded into custody pending trial. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones and cameras thrust forward like spears. Mr. Langston stepped up first, addressing them with calm authority. "We're here because a small group of people thought they could exploit our trust for personal gain," he said. "They were wrong. This community stands united." I stayed in the background, not really interested in the spotlight, but seeing the neighborhood band together like that felt better than any headline. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere around the neighborhood shifted even more. Without Cheryl and her cronies breathing down everyone's necks, people relaxed. You could hear kids laughing in the streets again. Barbecues popped up in front yards. Porch lights stayed on later. One Saturday morning, I was patching up a section of my fence when Mrs. Carmichael walked by with her dog. She waved and called out, "We're having a potluck tonight at the park. You better show up, Owen." I laughed. Wouldn't miss it. That evening, the park was alive with energy. String lights hung between trees. Tables groaned under the weight of homemade casseroles, grilled meats, and desserts. Someone had even set up a karaoke machine, and Mr. Patel was butchering an old pop song with enthusiastic abandon. I grabbed a plate and found a spot by the picnic tables. Pam sat down next to me, balancing a slice of pie on her knee. "You know," she said, "I used to think this neighborhood was just a place to live. Now, it actually feels like a community." "Funny what happens when you get rid of a tyrant," I said, grinning. Pam nodded. "Still can't believe she tried to evict you in the middle of the night." "Yeah," I said. "Guess she forgot that some people have better connections than a fake clipboard." We both laughed, the kind of easy, genuine laughter that had been missing for too long. Later that night, as the stars blinked awake in the sky, Wyatt showed up with a cooler full of sodas and a stack of folding chairs. He caught my eye and raised an eyebrow. "So," he said, cracking open a root beer, "you ready to run for HOA president next year?" I almost choked on my drink. "Not a chance." Wyatt chuckled. "Probably for the best. You're more useful stirring up trouble than keeping order." "Besides," I said, watching kids chase each other across the grass, "this place doesn't need a ruler. It just needed a wake-up call." As the night wore on, the karaoke machine kept blaring, the food kept disappearing, and the laughter never stopped. Looking around, I realized something. Cheryl had tried to turn this neighborhood into her little kingdom. But in the end, all she managed to do was bring everyone together. Funny how people like her always forget real power doesn't come from clipboards, fines, or fake patrols. It comes from neighbors who refuse to be pushed around. The next few weeks passed in a strange mixture of energy and determination. The neighborhood, once tiptoeing around HOA threats, was alive with a new purpose. We weren't just cleaning up Cheryl's mess. We were rebuilding something better from the ground up. Early one morning, as I was finishing up a new welcome sign for the entrance hand-painted by a few of the neighborhood kids, an unmarked black SUV rolled slowly down the street. It parked just outside the park where volunteers were setting up tables for the weekend community yard sale. Two men and a woman stepped out, all wearing jackets with the county prosecutor's office insignia on them. They moved with a quiet, focused purpose, scanning the area until they spotted Wyatt, who had stopped by in uniform to help carry tables. Wyatt met them halfway across the grass, exchanging a few quick words. Then he motioned to me. As I approached, the taller of the two men pulled a folder from under his arm and handed it over. "Mr. Anderson?" "I'm Investigator Dale with the County Financial Crimes Division," he said. "We're following up on additional evidence related to your HOA's activities." I glanced at Wyatt, who gave me a small nod. Dale opened the folder to reveal copies of bank statements, all bearing signatures from Cheryl and the two other so-called board members. But what caught my eye immediately wasn't the missing HOA funds. It was a series of payments labeled security services, routed to a private contractor based 2 towns over. "That name ring a bell?" Dale asked. I shook my head. "Never heard of them." "We hadn't either," Dale said. "Turns out it's a shell company. No employees, no office space. Just a P.O. box and a checking account." Wyatt crossed his arms. "And guess who's listed as the account holder?" I didn't need to guess. Dale nodded. "Cheryl Daniels." The woman investigator, who introduced herself as Agent Ruiz, pulled out another sheet. "It gets worse. We've tracked unauthorized access to residents' private information, bank details, license plate numbers, even background checks. All without consent." I felt a slow, cold anger building in my chest. "They pulled background checks on families?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. "Multiple cases," Ruiz confirmed. "We believe they intended to use that information to intimidate or coerce compliance." Wyatt's jaw was set like stone. "This isn't just embezzlement anymore. We're looking at identity theft, illegal surveillance, and racketeering." Dale closed the folder. "We'll need formal victim statements from as many residents as possible. The DA's office is preparing a racketeering case under state law. If convicted, Cheryl and her associates could be looking at decades." I nodded sharply. "You'll have your statements." That night, under the same string lights at the park, we organized a meeting. I stood up on one of the picnic tables, holding a megaphone that someone had borrowed from the local high school. "Folks," I began, scanning the crowd, "it's worse than we thought." I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid it all out: the fake security company, the unauthorized background checks, the shell accounts. Gasps and angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mr. Langston stepped forward, calm and steady as always. "We need to act together. The investigators need our statements to build their case. Every one of us who's been fined, threatened, or had our information accessed without permission, we speak up now." Hands shot up across the park. Faces that had once been hesitant now burned with determination. We set up sign-up sheets right there. Wyatt and 2 deputies helped organize families into small groups, collecting statements late into the night under the pavilion's flickering lights. By the end of the weekend, over 70 homeowners had submitted formal complaints. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office moved fast. Armed with the new evidence, they executed a search warrant on Cheryl's house. According to Wyatt, it was like pulling the cork out of a rotten barrel. Inside her garage, they found dozens of boxes filled with unauthorized files on residents. Some were annotated with red pen notes like, "Watch for violations and increase fines." In her attic, they uncovered cash bundles totaling over $15,000, hidden inside hollowed-out encyclopedia volumes. She had been skimming cash payments too, demanding fine settlements, under the table to avoid official records. The final nail in the coffin came when they traced a series of threatening anonymous letters sent to residents who had dared to question the HOA. Handwriting analysis linked them directly to Cheryl and one of her so-called board members. The county filed additional charges: conspiracy to commit extortion, wire fraud, unauthorized access to protected personal information, and operating an unlicensed security business. The trial date was set for early spring. When the day arrived, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, sketch artists hunched over pads, and TV cameras waited outside. Half the neighborhood turned up, dressed sharply and sitting quietly behind the prosecution table. Cheryl shuffled in, wrists cuffed, wearing an ill-fitting gray suit that did nothing to hide how worn down she looked. Her lawyer, looking even more bedraggled than the last time, barely made eye contact with anyone. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Vance, stood confidently as the charges were read. Racketeering, grand larceny, extortion, identity theft.
Inautorisée de surveillance.
When Cheryl's attorney muttered guilty to each charge as part of a plea deal, a ripple of barely contained relief passed through the gallery. The judge, a towering man with a commanding voice, made it clear he wasn't feeling charitable. You abused your position, manipulated your neighbors, and committed serious crimes against the very community you claim to serve, he said. You turned your authority into a weapon. This court finds your actions reprehensible. He sentenced Cheryl Daniels to 22 years in state prison, with no chance of parole for at least 15 years. Her two accomplices received lesser sentences, 5 and 7 years respectively, for their roles in the conspiracy. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter.
Cleaner.
Reporters swarmed, but this time, no one felt like hiding. Mr. Langston gave a brief statement thanking the DA's office, the sheriff's department, and the residents for standing together. At the next neighborhood meeting, there were no grim faces, no whispered grievances. Just laughter, homemade food, and a shared sense of triumph. The new board announced sweeping reforms: full transparency on financials, an open-door policy for grievances, and a standing rule that no fines could be issued without a review panel of elected homeowners. We even established a neighborhood festival day every summer to celebrate how far we had come. As the months passed, the scars Cheryl had left began to fade. New families moved in, drawn by the sense of community that now defined our streets. Kids rode their bikes freely. Chalk drawings decorated sidewalks, and porch swings creaked under the weight of easy conversation. One evening, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, Wyatt pulled up in his truck. He stepped out carrying a battered manila folder. "Told you this would come in handy one day," he said, handing it over. Inside were copies of all the official documents from Cheryl's case, a reminder of what we had overcome. "You keeping this for your memoir?" he teased. I laughed.
Nah.
Might frame it, though, right next to the new HOA charter. Wyatt chuckled, then leaned against the porch railing, watching the kids play down the street. "You know," he said, "I don't think they'll ever try anything like that here again." I nodded. "Not while we're watching each other's backs." As the sun dipped below the rooftops and the first stars blinked into view, I realized something. Cheryl had tried to build an empire of fear. Instead, she had built the strongest community I had ever been part of by showing us exactly what we would never allow again. And this time we were ready.